Hi, Longheads. We know you're listening. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Everest Plateau. This is episode 68, post Epic of Gilgamesh. It's like, how do you follow up on an act like that? I've listened to that show over. It's so awesome. That show is so great. And as one of the Snake Bros, Snake Force, Brenner, commented on that he was like, dude, you put the Epic of Gilgamesh into a way that, like, dudes can understand it.
Dude language.
It was like dude language. Episode Epic of Gilgamesh, dude version. And as always, joining us from deep beneath his secret space station and his secret bunker in secret outer space, Mr. Brett England, the Watcher. How you doing, buddy?
Still recovering from the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was epic and also Gilgamesh.
Yeah, and we also took a trip to Big Bend, which the Watcher and I went out to Big Bend, the national park, which we are going to talk about later. But first, we have space weather news.
Still got to get that soundbite for the little keyboard thing.
Holes in the sun's atmosphere. 2 holes in the sun's atmosphere are turning to face Earth, each spewing a stream of solar wind towards our planet. Arctic auroras are likely on October 4th through 5th and October 7th through 8th when the gaseous material arrives. And then the next is the parent of the Draconid meteor shower. On October 8th, the Earth will pass through a stream of debris from Comet 21P/Geekiag-Zinner. I totally said that right. The source of the annual Draconid meteor shower. Usually the shower is weak, producing no more than 5 or 10 meteors per hour. Could 2018 be better than usual? Maybe, because the comet itself is relatively nearby. Jose J. Chambo of Tenerife, Spain, photographed 21P Geekiag-Zinner only 60 million kilometers from Earth. He said, I caught the comet as it was moving across the Milky Way between Gemini and Orion. That's the Monkey Head Nebula in GC 2174 near the top. His photo beautifully captures the comet's tail, spewing meteoroids which could one day become Draconid meteors in the atmosphere of Earth. This comet, which swings through the inner solar system every 6.6.6666666 years, made its latest close approach to the sun on September 10th. That's significant because years around perihelion sometimes brings an extra dose of draconids.
Is that the skull-shaped one that comes on Halloween?
I don't know, but it's named after dragons. Forecasters don't expect such a surge this year, but surprises are possible from this notoriously bursty shower. Bursty. That's a word.
Yeah.
The nearly new moon will provide a velvety dark backdrop for any meteors that do appear during the night of October 8th through 9th. On your calendar, mark those dates as draconids? ? All right, so that's it for space weather news. What do you got for us, Kyle? What do you got in the news?
Space news. The hole in the Russian space station has been determined to be on purpose.
What?
The Russians basically said, yes, it's sabotage. Someone drilled this hole.
Oh, my God.
And it was not... They're trying to claim that it wasn't like a manufacturing error.
Oh, okay.
So... Somebody drilled the hole, and then now there's a picture of it, and it's like he's got his finger there, and there's this tiny little hole, and you can see it's round, it's drilled.
Wow.
Straight up, dude. Someone tried to sabs.
Wow.
The Russian module.
Wow, that's crazy.
So
This Soyuz. See, people, this is why we need Space Force.
And there was an alien spacecraft caught on NASA ISS live stream. Filmed outside the International Space Station.
After which all the cameras had a malfunction and they went down.
Right before they found the hole. An alien UFO was caught zipping past the International Space Station, according to conspiracy theorists who watched NASA's round-the-clock live stream. This is September 27th.
Still.
Yeah, that's pretty new. Notorious UFO hunter Scott C. Warren claims to have spotted a bright and unidentified object outside the ISS on September 27th. The UFO expert shared stills from the official NASA ISS live stream, a 24-hour live broadcast until there's a UFO, and then it goes down. From the orbital laboratory, which supposedly support his UFO sighting. Mr. Waring said, "You're looking at a UFO that's near the space station today, and this is September 27th, 2018. It looks a little like a TR-3B, except maybe 4 sides on it, so look at that."
A TR-3B is a triangular crab, so a 4-sided one is strange.
A TR-3B.
A TR-3B2.
Also in space news is China's laser satellite.
All right.
Dude,
wait.
What? Was I not predicting this? Okay, China is saying that...
They're going to shoot holes in the Antarctic ice with lasers.
No. It was when I was talking about using LiDAR on the ocean. So
okay. Yeah.
Right after that show, I saw this story. China's new spy satellite, Project Guanlan, could use lasers to spot submarines up to 1,600 feet below the ocean's surface. These lasers will be so powerful, they will make the upper layer of the sea more or less transparent, according to scientists involved in the project.
Wow.
Researchers claim these artificial laser beams could be 1 billion times brighter than the sun.
Wait.
However, some experts say this type of deep-sea surveillance is mission impossible, as lasers are fundamentally unable to penetrate that deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bunch of... Did
they say artificial laser beams?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I noticed that.
Implying that somewhere out there are natural laser beams.
Yeah.
That would be cool.
Basically, they're using LiDAR, but it won't only be useful on the ocean floor.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be a satellite that is LiDAR capable.
Right.
And they
can use it on land, too.
Yeah. According to researchers, this high-powered laser beam is so powerful it would be able to scan an area as wide as 62 miles on land.
Wow.
It will also be used alongside microwave radar, which will scan the surface of the water and identify surface movement. This could be an indication that a submarine is lurking below. So this is all about using it to find subs or whatever. And people are like, "It's a Death Star! We need Space Force!"
That's no moon.
Yeah. But anyway, there's a lot of institutions working together to try to make this happen. But then, there's a lot of other scientists that are like, "Nope, won't be able to go that deep."
Right.
It's too scattered and it's too dark. And then there's that layer you were talking about, the temperature discontinuity area or whatever.
Yep.
It's called, and it'll just reflect off of that.
Yeah.
So, but it's to be
The
seen.
Watcher says we need to convince the Chinese that there is a plot against China starting in the Amazon, so they will LiDAR the Amazon.
They plan this. I shouldn't say this. I was gonna say, okay, this is a joke, but I saw something like this in the comments. It's like China's planning to get it done by 2050 after other countries get it done by 2045, and then they'll steal it, and then they'll have. It's just anyway. Let's see.
Perhaps the Americans would like to buy it from us with their plastic credit card.
Take care.
Okay,
That's from South Park, if you haven't seen it.
last bit of space news. Space elevator to be built.
All right.
By 2050, again. So NASA says the basic concept of a space elevator is sound, and research around the world is optimistic that one can be built. Hopefully by 2050. And China says it wants to build one as soon as 2045. It does say that. So I'm going to skip to this one part of the story.
It's an elevator that goes to Space Watcher, not an elevator to take space higher than where it is.
The ISS is doing an experiment of the space-tethered autonomous robotic satellite mini elevator, or STARS Me. It was devised by physicists from Japan's Shizuoka University. It will simulate on a small scale the conditions that the components of such a system would encounter. Cameras will examine the movement of a pair of tiny CubeSats along a 10-meter tether in a weightless environment. It's going to be the world's first experiment to test elevator movement in space.
Yeah.
The steel tether to be used in the experiment is too heavy to be used as a full-size space elevator, which
Right.
must, of course, extend for tens of thousands of miles.
Yeah.
But a growing number of scientists, including Michio Kaku, now believe that an ultra-strong carbon-based material known as graphene
Yeah.
could be just the material needed. On paper, it has the tensile strength to keep the space elevator anchored to the ground. Graphene is ounce for ounce 200 times stronger than steel.
Yeah. So for those of you that don't like totally nerd out on space elevator stuff, the idea is you have to put, you basically don't start from the ground and build it upwards. You build a space station out in what's known as geosynchronous orbit, which is 22,000 miles above the surface of the planet. That's the distance from the Earth at which orbital speed, also like your orbital speed makes your orbital time match the 24-hour period of the rotation of the Earth. So you have to do it in an equatorial region.
It's
so that
22,000 miles out there.
Right. So what you do is you build a giant space station 22,000 miles out, and then you start dropping the tether from that position towards the ground. So you grow it downwards, and then you don't ever actually connect it to the surface, because even in geosynchronous orbit, because of the tilt of the axis, a geosynchronous satellite makes a figure 8 pattern. So probably the best way to do it, all the diagrams that I've seen, like, speculative engineering diagrams, show the tether dropping down over an ocean place somewhere, and then has all these other tethers coming off of that with water anchors on it. Yeah. So that it just basically, the bottom of it would float maybe a couple of miles or even closer to the surface, and then you would have the ends of the tethers that are water anchors would also be facilities, and you would ride one of those up to the actual tether that goes into space, lock onto that thing, and then ride that all the way up. And then, of course, you can use gravitic braking on the way down to regenerate your power, or regenerative braking. So anyway, it's a cool idea, and the only reason we have it, or one of the reasons that it hasn't been tried yet or seriously talked about yet, is because of materials science hasn't ever reached the point where we would have a material with the tensile strength to hold itself, even just its own weight, at 22,000 miles long.
Yeah. So they're also talking about the other major problem is space debris.
Right.
So, but they think like in this story it talks about that, and they're saying, we'll get rid of the space debris, no big deal.
Yeah.
Like they think they have plans to handle
well, and I mean, like, once you have a space elevator, maintenance in space becomes a lot cheaper. So if you're building you just build robotic devices that constantly monitor the tether itself and repair anywhere, because the graphene can be grown.
Yeah, it says about the production of graphene. It says small lengths of graphene are commercially available, but they're too short to be used to make a space elevator tether. What we really need is graphene produced in very long lengths of continuous sheet.
Yeah.
So they'll have to, basically build a graphene production facility in the space station, and just like continuously produce it.
Yeah.
And just let it go down.
And make a space tether out of a monomolecule.
Yeah. And the first thing it's going to do is try to equalize itself electrically with the surface of the planet, and burn everything.
That's right. Set everything on fire and kill us all.
I have one.
Fishing next to the space tether would probably not be a good idea.
But it could be a combination,
power generator.
Elevator and power generator.
That's right.
It'd be like endless amounts of current.
Yep. And we will once again have built a place on Earth where men become gods.
I have one small correction to make, and it was during the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I was talking about the boat that they were building, and I was saying that the boat was to be divided by portcullis.
Oh,
portcullis. I don't know why I was using it. Bulkheads. Is what I meant.
Portcullis is
I just listened to the
spike
episode.
gates that drop down to block people from getting into castles.
I was I'm imagining people envisioning the object that I was describing. It's like all these friggin' spiked gates. Yeah, bulkheads.
This is how you keep the dinosaurs in their section on the ark.
That's funny.
I also liked how you called the guy Oceanabi. Like, that's a way
Yeah, I
better
know.
name.
Well,
He's
that's
the
what
ocean guy.
That's what it sounds like the dude, because I listened to an audiobook version.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what it sounds like he's saying.
Right. Yeah, I totally understand. Like, when I saw the spelling, I was completely surprised.
I know. I was like, oh, dang. The
It's-
ferryman
it's
is Urshanabi, not Oceanabi.
All right, so we went to Big Bend this past weekend, the Watcher and I, and it was awesome. So I want to talk about that real quick. This is the interesting thing. The main thing that I want to discuss is, like, from my perspective, was when we were driving home from Big Bend, and I didn't notice this on the way out there. I don't know how I missed it, but maybe it was because it was getting dark, because we left in the afternoon and drove until dark, basically. But on the way back during the day, we're basically we had just gotten out of the park, and the park is enormous, so we had just left the park, and we're on the road that's between a little town called Marathon, which is the closest little place to the park itself, and Fort Stockton. It's on 385, Highway 385. So we're driving on that, heading north, and I see this brown sign, like the brown signs that tell you this historical marker or whatever. Yeah. This sign comes up and it says, "Entering Sierra Madera Astrobleem." And I was like, wait, I hit the brakes. I'm like, there's no, I'm all, whoa, wait, what was that? What did that just say? Because an astrobleem, of course, the word means star wound. It's an ancient crater. It's an impact crater. And it took us, so like, I was like, that said, we're entering an astrobleem. So we drive across this and like, once I realized that's what it was, you could look out there and you could see the rim wall way out there. There was the central peaks, right? And so then, of course, when I got home, I looked it up. And yes, it's many miles across. It's an ancient impact crater that's confirmed. There, like, as we're driving through, we see all this industry, people mining and getting gases for the mining process. We see all this stuff out there. Wow. They're in the astrobleem, like, looking for minerals and platinum groups, metals and stuff like that come in on asteroid impacts.
That's awesome.
But this made the whole, like, so Big Bend itself is a very strange place geologically, and I was going to bring the Watcher on to talk about his impressions of the geology of this place. So you there, buddy?
Yeah, it's and it's really interesting. I wonder how much different our conversations about the area would have been had we seen that sign going in.
Right. I thought of that too.
Because the whole time we're there, I'm just looking at everything. It was my first time being there, and I'm like, what in the hell happened here?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's just these giant, like, granite. They're not even mountains. They're just sort of like rock claws.
Right.
That are like up out of the ground.
Yes.
And there's gaps in the range. Like, it's not like any mountain range you've ever seen, but it has the elevation of a mountain range. And the shapes are varied. The Tanaha Canyon, don't even get me started. You've got folded layers of sedimentation that are like rolling. Also very strange.
Yeah.
But seeing that on the way out, it makes
sense. I think we lost him.
I accidentally hit the mute.
No, don't do that.
Yeah, well, it made a lot more sense, especially when you consider that it was probably all underwater at the time that impact happened.
Right, that's what I thought too. So,
and then some of the weird sloping elevations, some of the weird patterning, well, if there were tidal waves everywhere and a bunch of earthquakes, and all the lava that gets shot up is immediately cooled by the ocean, well, then it starts to make a lot more sense.
Right. So I wanted to ask you if you remember so they've got a new display there on the way out or into the park. It's on the entrance road. So basically, like, when you're entering the park, you're driving through this enormous floodplain flats that's now desert. It's desert and desert scrub. But looking at it with these eyes, because I had been there years ago, but looking at it with these eyes, I could see the sort of scale invariance of the whole system. Like, way out in the distance, you have these enormous bluffs on either side that are cut flat, right? And then down below those, you see these, like, rolling hills that have all these strange folded sediment sticking up. But on the top is on the outside bluffs is granite stuff. Okay, so this granite stuff was volcanic or something like that. Okay, granite's abyssal. Okay, so it's volcanic in origin, but it eventually gets upthrust and ends up on the surface. So I'm looking at these way out there in the distance, and then closer are these rolling hills of sediment, and then even closer are all these just piles, just like random mounds of dirt and rock and rubble that are nevertheless, like, at least some of them are delineated by stratification, right? Now some of them aren't, they're just mounds of rubble. Like the closer ones I could see, they're just like random, like even short hills, like, maybe 20 feet tall, but it's just this random hill like right there in the middle, and it's like very strange. But if you back out and realize that you're basically in this flat area between these enormous cliffs way out, like they're miles and miles apart, that this is a huge floodplain. I'm Randall Carlsoning this place, and I'm realizing that this is what this is, like that water just ran through here in immense amounts and like dropped all this stuff. Okay, but anyway, in the fossil exhibit that they built, we're going through there and they're showing us the various stages that the park lands had gone through in the past, right? So ignoring the dates they put on it, because that doesn't matter, they're saying, okay, so the first thing we have is the inland sea. Okay, and Big Bend was under the water, basically. Okay, and then there was the KT event. Okay, the KT event, which is the Cretaceous Tertiary explosion, the impact, whatever, that they say killed off all the dinosaurs. That happens, and then so the sea is gone. It drains out, okay? And that's caused all this massive uplift and everything, and changes everything around there. The ocean drains out, and then you have this like marshland. They showed pictures, like the artist depictions of it, of this like enormous snaking river, this huge snaking river with like Everglades like marsh all around it. Like, so water is like running off into the various areas of this flatland, but in the middle there's this big river, okay? And that lasted for a long time, and then eventually that dries out even more, and it becomes like a deciduous forest, like a massive, enormous forest with huge trees. And this is when the mammals start coming around, okay? And then eventually there's another cataclysm that turns it into the desert that it is today. And like they were showing pictures of enormous petrified stumps of trees that are still in place from where they were growing, but now they're completely petrified. So the tree is gone. The stump is just sticking up out of the ground, and it's cut off or broken off where the tree was, but all the roots are still there, and it's still in the place where it was growing at the time of the forest, right? So under the forest layers are all the layers of marsh stuff, and then under that is highly disturbed, like heavily mixed ocean sediments that has basically been turned into a single gigantic layer from the KT event, okay? So in the canyon that we went in, the Ernst Tanaha, which is a kind of a famous Big Bend canyon that has the Tanaha itself is a big pool of water that's, when the water level's low, it's like a cenote. It's like if you fall in and there's no one there to help you out, you're gonna die because the rock's too slippery. And so I have pictures I want to post on the show notes, but basically like the rock that hole that the water is in, the rock that hole is in is totally uniform.
Yeah.
And like white colored, and like it's almost like polished marble, or it's very slippery. It reminded me in some ways of chert, or like a low level of flint, right? But there's no stratification in it. It's just like a single piece. There's no strata. Okay. But sitting directly on top of it are these, all of a sudden, just like right on top of it, begins all these tiny little layers, right? Like extremely demarcated layering, and some of the layers are like minuscule, like very thin, and there's like hundreds of them, and then there's a big thick layer, and there's hundreds of little tiny layers, and then there's another big thick layer. I have pictures of this where you can see, like, looking from far away, you see this very regular like pattern of lots of tiny layers and then a big thick one, and then lots of tiny layers and then a big thick one, right? And so we were talking about like, so possibly that shirt-like material, which, by the way, up farther up the canyon, we found huge pieces of it that had coral all broken and mixed up into it, pieces of shells, right? So this was probably the sediment of the bottom of the ocean that gets mixed up from this impact. And I'm thinking this astrobleem. So we're driving through this impact crater that happened less than 100 miles from the beginning of the park.
Yeah.
So, like, that has to have something to do with this. I wonder.
Did they have a date for that at all? Did y'all ever figure?
I couldn't find a date for it. But I don't care what the date is because.
But when you first were telling me about the layers, just on a side note, having like all these tiny little layers and then a big thick layer and then tiny little layers repeated over and over, it makes me. You had mentioned how it's like possibly showing like these cycles of cataclysm, like small scale cataclysms,
right?
Like pretty regularly.
Yes, I mean like the layering, the way the thick layers, you can see them in there. The pattern is very regular. Yeah. Like some of them are a little farther apart than others, but it's so regular that it's just like, okay, it's showing a cyclical thing.
It made me think about the tree rings. Like I learned that when you look at these tree rings, like you'll see, a series of rings that are like fairly regularly spaced and they're kind of far apart, and then there will be another series of rings that are really close together.
Yeah.
And the rings that are really close together are in times of extreme cold, or a lot of a lot more cold or less water. Like because a tree can't grow as much.
Yeah,
right?
Years of famine or whatever.
Yeah, the distance between one ring and another shows you how much it grew that season. So there was a lot of water. It was not as cold, and then so you'll have like these periods where all the rings are real tightly packed, which means that they didn't have a whole lot of sunlight due to cloud cover or snow cover.
Right.
Like if they were covered in snow like all year round, they're gonna have tiny little layers.
Right, they're barely gonna grow at all. Yeah.
So it kind of makes me think like we're looking at bigger cycles though when it comes to sediment. So longer cycles.
Well, I even think so when I'm like looking very closely at these, like you can't tell this from far away, but when I got very close, you could see that like in between the thick layers, the small layers, they're very tiny. And to me, because we have seasons, like each one is going to, like just with the snow cores, like each one is going to represent a year, because the sediments that will come into the water for whatever reason will change over the seasons, and that results in a discontinuity for each. You see what I'm saying? I don't know if this is totally true, but it makes sense to me that like when you go from summer to summer, the changing seasons are going to result in different sediments ending up in the layer, and then so you're going to have these discontinuities, and that's going to result in one layer, and then there's the next layer, and then there's the next layer, and that only happens when there's not very much disturbances, when everything's pretty regular.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was that the thick layers also you could see like tree ring-like layering in it, but they weren't demarcated by separation. Like they weren't separated from each other like those really tiny ones.
Yeah. So it could have been like.
So what I'm thinking is like what we have is an ice age period and a non-ice age period.
Yeah.
The non-ice
period of like a lot of volcanic upheaval. So you're getting ash and all this.
Yes.
And that makes it bond cements it into this big fat layer.
Exactly. So lots of volcanism is a product of cataclysmic periods or events.
Yeah.
Right. And also like during ice age or like. And it could be the opposite. It could be that the summer periods result, or the warm periods result in very smooth, like layers that bond all together, and it's the ice age layers that don't. I don't know which one it is, but if it is that way, that means that the ice age periods are much longer and have a lot more layers than the warm ones. Because the warm ones are. I was looking at the warm ones as being a single cataclysmic deposition, or maybe multiple years of cataclysmic. During a cataclysmic period or whatever. But nevertheless, you can see the pattern in the sediment. And what's interesting is that this is all sitting directly on top of this single gigantic bedrock-like chert thing.
Yeah.
That flows through the entire bottom of the Tanaha Canyon. And so like that was just really blowing my mind. So like my tentative story that I put together based on their pictures and their explanations of what the park had used to be like, is that it was the marshland-like period that put all the little tiny layers in on top of this. That's what I'm thinking. Because like it's the peat, it's the marsh, the peat moss. It's all watery, so sediment moves in and drops very in a very regular way. Right?
Yeah.
And then cataclysmic periods will drastically change the kind of depositions that sort of environment will make.
Yeah, and usually brings a lot more deposition.
Right, exactly. Whereas the ocean itself would have had a bunch of, it would have made a lot of limestone, but all that was churned together and then once again deposited smoothly into like a single gigantic aggregate from the cataclysmic KT event. Right, and so the fossils that were in that material match the KT stuff.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking, and maybe this was your point, but when the sediments are being laid down year after year after year after year, they're not instantly turning to stone, but in a calm sea bottom, they would remain fairly well intact, like in order.
And demarcated,
But then if a cataclysm comes, it takes, it stirs up the bottom of the sea. So all of that sediment that had been laid down in however many hundreds of years
gets
in the past gets mixed up, and then it's laid down again as more of an aggregate.
I got you.
And makes a thick layer that bonds, and plus the whatever volcanic ash and all the other stuff that's being added to it.
Yeah.
So then you get a thick layer.
I got you. That makes sense.
So it's basically stirring up the bottom.
Yeah. That makes sense. And so like the other thing is that this whole place is upthrust.
Yeah.
Okay. That's why so we're standing at the bottom of this canyon, and all these layers we're looking at are towering above us.
Right.
Like massively towering above us. So that the very tops of those layers, 100, 200 feet up or whatever, used to be below water.
Right.
Used to be way down below us or whatever. Or otherwise you have to argue that the water was way above them. And I don't know which one is right. But I do know that this whole area of Texas has been upthrust. It used to be an ocean basin, and now it's not. Right?
Yeah.
So something happens, the whole area sort of lifts up, water drains out and cuts all kinds of stuff. Okay. And then a marshland develops. That starts dropping its own kind of sediments on top of the mixed crap from before. Okay, and this is where you start finding the other different types of fossils, grasses. There's strange, like there's palm frond stuff. They had fossils of them in the fossil display that they had. They these huge, like segmented branches of palm fronds that used to be in their ferns and stuff that I've recognized from seeing out here in some places, but they're always stuck in rock. This one, somebody had taken the time with a Dremel tool and cleaned the whole thing up and made it just like where you could see the whole deal. It was really cool. Also in there was interesting, lots of fossils of totally unknown species. There was one they had just like half of the skull of something they said was like a smaller version of a T-Rex that was completely unknown. And the only thing they had was it was maybe 10 inches long, and it had teeth that were like 5 inches long. And I was like, holy shit, what is that thing? And there was another thing, like real quick before we go into a break here, there was another thing, there's this gigantic alligator/crocodile skull that they had found that they said was so large it probably hunted the T-Rexes. And they had this painting of a T-Rex like, rah, getting eaten by this gigantic crocodile coming out of the marsh. Yes. And they had a T-Rex skull there, and then next to it, this crocodile skull that's like 6 feet long. I was like, oh my God. It's freaking badass.
That's awesome.
So anyway, yeah, it was a great trip. We saw a bear. We didn't get eaten, didn't get lost and die, but I did buy a glad hat. So we're going to take a break and come back, and we're going to make some comments on the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then we're going to move into some other topics.
Stand down.
Continuing to keep Enlil awake from within the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Tower of Babel we are all of one snake tongue here at Brothers of the Serpent Podcast. Returning now.
I cannot sleep by reason of the babble. Screw that guy.
Yeah. All snake bros give glory to Ea.
That's right. All praise to Ea. His name is shorter and I like him better.
Yeah, just real quick, that is part of our theory about the name of the podcast. We're basically brothers of Enki.
That's right.
The serpent.
That's right.
The Sumerian serpent who was friends of with man.
Yeah.
The friend of man. And he gave us plans for our first cataclysm surviving boat.
That's right.
Yes.
So, I want to go ahead and bring the Watcher back on. He's got some interesting medical information to tell us.
We're all gonna die.
Basically what it is we're all gonna die.
So the thought started. I had a patient who's actually a quadriplegic, had a neck injury to C4, so his arms, legs, everything's paralyzed. But he's in a study in the final stages of being approved to have stem cells injected, and they're projecting a 70% recovery of his mobility. The way that they're doing this, previously, what has been done is if they're going to take stem cells, they'll either take them from the embryonic sac, because they're pluripotent, which means they can turn into anything, or from fetal blood.
Yeah.
Now, what they're doing now is they can withdraw fat cells, typically from the abdomen, and then using, I'm doing air quotes here because you can't see them, so I have to say them, using gene therapy, transferring those into pluripotent stem cells that they can then use in this therapy. So gene therapy, which is a great term, is they genetically engineer a virus that goes in and reprograms the DNA in the cell. The cool thing about the way they're doing this is because it starts out as your own cell,
It turns
there's
into your own.
no rejection
Yeah. And it
possibility whatsoever.
It basically turns into your own pluripotent stem cell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cannot do that.
And what they'd been doing previously is they hadn't been able to really force cells back to pluripotent. So if you needed, say, blood therapy, they'd take from bone marrow and work it back to a stem cell that was a
marrow stem cell.
Right, it would be a blood stem cell. It was kind of undifferentiated, but differentiated to a point.
Right. It's a stem cell for that specific body part as opposed to a pluripotent.
Right, or tissue type.
Yeah.
Exactly. But now that they can do this,
Stand down or die.
there's still a lot of research that needs to be done. There's a lot of experimentation. But the fact that they can create pluripotent stem cells from existing tissue cells is completely game-changing. I mean, now it's kind of an issue of figuring out how to use it, because now the tools there, they just are coming up with ways to go in and make the repairs. The problem with neuron injury is your nerves are glial cells. I won't get into it, but when they scar, just like a scar on your skin, if you have a scar, try poking it and see if you feel it.
Yeah.
You might feel pressure, but you don't feel light touch. You can't really get tickled across a scar.
Yeah.
The reason for that is because it's basically like a plug.
Right.
With these pluripotent stem cells, they're able to grow around or back through or even reverse the scarring, which is amazing.
Yeah. So I think like two interesting things about this. One is if you're paralyzed, get fat, because they're going to use your fat cells to heal you. Just saying. That's my takeaway. Two,
Hard to do, also, when you're paralyzed.
difficult to do.
Atrophy.
The other thing, the real takeaway that I have from this is the, like, you know, your air quotes gene therapy. They're doing it with bioengineered viruses.
Exactly.
And the reason they can do that is because viruses are already designed to do this, to go in and start unplugging extension cords and shit like that in your DNA and changing
I cannot
things.
do that.
Right.
Right.
So it's fascinating that we even have viruses in the first place, and that like brings to question, you know, I mean, all the questions about viruses that exist. Are they even alive? Are they just machines? They look like nanomachines, basically, you know,
They're like non-carbon based life forms.
right.
Basically.
Yeah, they're molecular machines that are designed, that have all these keys and various tools and plugs that they can basically enter your cell, like they can get through the cell wall and get into the nucleus of the cell and start changing things in the genetic code. For what reason?
Yeah, the
Why are they
easiest
doing
way to
it?
visualize a virus model-wise that I've seen is it looks almost like a little lunar lander.
Right, exactly.
It's got this back chamber full of RNA that it's going to inject, and it just lands, attaches to your cell wall,
Yeah, it has a key
Puts
that
out a
let it
feeler.
allow it to get
Right,
through the
and
cell
then
wall.
injects it.
Yeah.
And then your cell is changed.
Yes.
Which nanomachine is a great comparison, because that's what we're aiming to do with nanomachines.
Right. A nanomachine, like the engineering like goal of nanotechnology is to have molecular sized things that can go in and work on things on the molecular level, and that's exactly what viruses are, at least on on the biological sense.
So do you remember this story that I brought up a while back that was basically saying like something like, 800,000 viruses land on every square meter of the Earth every day?
Yeah.
And they're flying around in the jet streams and all this kind of stuff, and we don't know. They might be coming from outer space, all this kind of stuff. You remember that? I was thinking about time travel and like this idea that, we could go back in time and like walk around and do stuff or whatever.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that like we're all like constantly being updated. Every aspect of life is being updated.
Yeah.
Constantly.
I got
so
you.
it's like we're running this current OS, right? that has
biological operating system.
Yes, all of these viruses that are editing the bacteria everywhere in the ocean, in the air, everywhere in the world, and then that bacteria is coming to us, and then we're getting viruses, and it's all being changed. Tiny little things are editing our genes in various different ways. So if you were to time travel, say 1,000 years in the past. And you get out of the ship, you're just going to get sick and die. Like
Right.
you are going to be incompatible.
Right. So first you have to downgrade yourself.
That's
to
right.
That version.
You have to go back. Yeah. That was my thought. What do you think about that? Like, Brett.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely accurate, and there's really no way to tell to what degree there would be a problem,
Right.
because we don't have a way to quantify it as it stands. But it's very interesting. You can look at points in history where there's questions like the changeover from Neanderthal to a more advanced form of human, or Cro-Magnon. Each time there's a step, it also happens, let's say that it's around the time that there's a meteoric impact. Well, what type of viruses were on that meteor?
Right.
Was it intentional? Was it directed?
Yeah.
Was there some sort of comet that came through and threw off a bunch of stuff? Like, is there... And if so, was that directed? Did some alien race send it? Did it just happen by happenstance? Did it go by a planet with an advanced race and then it came by here and we were upgraded? I mean, there's all kinds of questions and potential answers that are out there from the analysis of this virus thing, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and I remember there was a story that I read, and I think I've talked about this on the show before, or mentioned it at least, that there was a they called it a super virus, but it was very, very old, incredibly ancient, and they found it, if I'm remembering this right, and I could be, they found it in one of the poles, so it's locked up in the ice, or whatever, and I can't remember if it was in a lake, or if it was actually, I think they might have been looking at, like, pieces of impact rocks that are trapped in the ice. That's what I think it was. It was pieces of meteor or whatever that were trapped in the ice, and they were looking at this. There was this virus associated with it, and they called it a super virus. It was very ancient, and I think it was something like 70% of the genetic code that was contained in this virus. First of all, it was enormous. It was far larger than any known virus of modern times. It had a lot more. It was bigger. It had a lot more molecule, basically. It was much, much larger. It had a lot more RNA contained in it. And it was basically, they were saying that 70% of the genetic information contained in this virus was corresponded with no known life on Earth at all. And that it may be that this virus itself may have locked up in it DNA codes of like very ancient, distant, extinct species, like whose DNA codes we've completely lost at this point. Very interesting stuff.
I'm having this vague memory of actually reporting a story on the podcast about a virus. It sounds like that, but I thought it was something like it contained like precursors to every single life form that we know of.
Yeah, it did, but also like it had precursors to everything, but also it had an enormous amount of code that was connected to nothing. Like they were saying that like this was, I can't remember what they called it, that it had DNA information that that was like they were calling it like not just super virus but something else, like that it was the
primordial virus.
Primordial like progenitor of life. This is
exactly.
Yeah,
that's what I remember from the story.
That this thing contained code of life forms that are no longer extant. Yeah, so that was really interesting. Okay, I've been doing a bunch of research like before I get into commentary that I want to make on the Epic of Gilgamesh story that Kyle so spectacularly told last podcast. I want to like briefly take a side trip into the subject, one of my favorite subjects of aptronyms, okay? Because I found a new one that blew my freaking mind. Okay. So we know that like we already have this collection. I've been like building this Snake Bros collection of aptronyms, like the guy who is talking about solar flares causing gigantic electrical storms that caused the last cataclysm is named Shock, right? And then the scientists who are looking at the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis is Firestone and West, right? Yeah. So I'm listening to Randall Carlson. Okay, this is great. I'm listening to Randall Carlson talk about the Carolina Bays, which we have discussed on the podcast. And I didn't know this, but so the Carolina Bays were first discovered as a phenomenon. Like they were known about in terms of like people walking around on the ground and noticing these large, but they just thought they were landforms. But in the 1930s, Roosevelt, I think, or somebody commissioned an air survey. Okay, like an aerial photographic survey of the eastern United States. And this is when the guy who was working at the whatever government institution that was putting together the mosaic of photographs taken from this aerial survey is the first one that noticed the bay phenomenon in the sense that it's a bunch of ovals that generally are facing the same direction, they're all overlapping, and it's something weird, right? Yeah. So the Carolina Bays are caused by, like, the best theory as it stands today is that they are caused by the Younger Dryas impact in the ice sheet, throwing up enormous, like, baseball stadium-sized chunks of ice that then fell and impacted into the soft sediments of the eastern seaboard, okay, and left these oval marks. So these are ballistic but non-meteoric impacts, which is why they're not circular.
Yeah.
Right. So you have giant chunks of ice that come down. They don't
from an angle, and they're kind of dragging a little bit.
Right, and like a meteor, if it impacts, it doesn't matter from what angle it impacts. If it impacts, it goes into the ground and then explodes, which makes every crater circular.
Yep.
Whereas these were ballistic but non-meteoric, so which means that the meteor hits the ice, all these enormous chunks get thrown up into the air. They go out into space. Some of them, a lot of them they're ballistic. Basically, they go way up. They have travel times of 45 minutes to an hour. They come back down and they impact, but they don't. It's not the same as a meteor. They're not coming in at 20,000 miles an hour, right? They just come down and poof, and they make these oval shapes because they're all sort of traveling in the same direction. Okay.
It's hailing in the Carolinas today. Stadium-sized hail balls have been reported.
Right. This is how everyone died with hail impacts to the head and shoulders.
Yeah.
Anyway. So this guy who's putting together the mosaic, the surveyor, basically, calls in a geologist friend whose name is Frank Melton.
Yeah.
What is going on here? How can all these people have the right names for this? It's still connected to the ice and everything. Is Frank Melton is the guy. And so he actually, this is in the 1930s. This is when uniformitarianism or uniformity was still like incredibly powerful. That like to go with any kind of cataclysmic idea of anything, even just they didn't even think impacts were possible. Rocks falling from the sky was just a ridiculous idea. Okay, it was not until much later that they started to accept, at this point, most of the craters on the moon were thought to be volcanic in some way. Okay, there's not this idea that rocks fall out of the sky. They didn't like that idea. So this guy starts to propose this. So anyway, what ends up happening is you end up having the celestials and the terrestrials. That's what they called them. The explanations for the Carolina Bays. The celestials were people who thought that they were some kind of meteoric something. That a meteor exploded and showered things, or that it hit an ice sheet and threw ice. Right? And then you have the terrestrials, which had this long, ridiculous freaking explanation. I can't even remember the name of now, but that guy's name was Douglas Johnson, so we know he's wrong.
cannot do that.
Douglas Johnson. But I just thought that was fascinating. Frank Melton is the geologist who proposed the whole like ice breakup theory. I'm just like, wait, how is this even possible? Melton.
That's great.
All right. So on the whole topic of Enoch, or not Enoch, the Epic of Gilgamesh. While going to Big Bend, the Watcher and I we were listening to portions of Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods, and he's basically going through the whole Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, the whole the progenitor gods of the Americas. And it struck me that, because you're talking about in the Epic of Gilgamesh, if we imagine these characters as civilizations,
Stand down or die.
well, there's this mystery in the Americas of these two civilizations of people that don't belong here, that are not like the Mongolian, Native American, or Indian peoples that populated the Americas when the Colombians, the Spaniards, and everybody got here, right? Because those are Mongoloids. They're of Asian stock, and they don't grow beards and stuff like this, and they're not Negro, okay? And yet we have in all these places in South and Central and North America, all the way up to Mexico, we have all these carvings of these giant basalt heads of Negro people, and in all these carvings and stories of these tall, bearded white dudes, and I'm like, Gilgamesh, Enki. Like, I'm thinking that
Enkidu,
yeah, of Enkidu. Like, so it's interesting because there's all these depictions. Like Monte Alban is one of the places that Graham Hancock is talking about. So he's going to all these different places, and I can't remember the names, but I did try to remember that one, Monte Alban, and I'll get to that. But he's talking about going from place to place, okay? And here are these depictions of these two peoples together, somehow working together, like shown in the same incredibly ancient friezes. This tall, aquiline featured, sharp nose, long beard, like wearing a long white robe tied with a rope sash. Okay, this guy, and he's like shown of proud stature, blah blah blah. And some people are like, well, it's the Phoenicians and the black people were their slaves, and it's like, no, because the black people are also shown tall, proud warrior types. Like I'm thinking Enkidu here. Like proud, so you have this Gilgamesh feature, character, the bearded, tall white guy, and then his it's that civilization though, and then the Enkidu civilization of these super badass African warrior guys. All these these basalt heads are showing them. If you look at them, they're showing these powerful, proud men. Yeah. Right. What's interesting is most of those basalt heads have been found in deep pits, thrown in there upside down with a whole bunch of burnt things and other things that have been defaced.
Yeah, they fell.
Right, or that it was actually commanded. Because the whole thing of they're too powerful, right? And then they defeat something or they conquer something or other, and then some of the gods decide one of them has to go. And then we see that okay, so at Monte Alban, there are friezes where you can tell that it's the same two people. Here's the tall Gilgamesh type guy, and then the other one that we know is the Enkidu type person has been completely scratched out. But we know it's him because you can see remnants of it. Okay, or there are so they've defaced the features of these various ones, but not the Gilgamesh civilization people. Right. So there was this purposeful erasure of one of these peoples in the Americas that are associated with the Viracochas, right? That are obviously working together all throughout the entire Americas, at least all the way up until Mexico. We have all these images of them working together, of them doing stuff together, and then that, I don't know, this just really struck me after that whole thing. That's cool. So the other thing at Monte Alban, some of the images there are not as well done. It's more like it was cataclysmic period or something, the artistry. The skill of the carving does not reach the level of those basalt heads or whatever, but you can still tell what they're depicting. Okay, and they're showing a defeated version of these people, right? That you have these bearded guys and these powerful African people, but they're all laying down, and they're some of them in fetal positions, they're warding off blows. Graham Hancock describes it as that okay, so the archaeologists are like, these are prisoners that were caught in wars, and he's like, prisoners from where? Right? Who are these prisoners, and where do they come from? Both of the depictions are showing racial phenotypes that did not, according to archaeology, exist in the Americas. Right? They don't match the Indian or Native American type, Mongoloid features that can't grow beards. Right? These guys are clearly African Negroes, and this one is clearly a Caucasian bearded guy. They're totally different, and yet the artists are able to capture all of these features that only exist in those racial types that these people shouldn't even have known about.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if like what you said, the Epic of Gilgamesh is actually telling us a story of two civilizations, and they first fight each other. Right, one of them is already high for whatever reason, maybe their association with these Anunnaki or these ancient gods. Yeah. The other one is wild but powerful.
Or from the perspective of the story, they know their own history.
But they don't know
the storyteller, but they don't know the history of the
other,
quote-unquote wild man.
Right, I got you.
Right?
Yeah.
And then when he just shows up one day,
right,
come and conquer them, and they have this massive battle.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. It's the whole, like, they're the barbarians
right.
idea. Okay.
And then eventually it's like, wait a minute, these people are awesome. And
right, yeah. And then they band together, and then they're unstoppable.
Yeah.
They go all over the world, and they do all this awesome stuff, but then something happens, and then for some reason, one of those civilizations is chosen to be destroyed.
Right.
And this is shown in artistry all over the Americas, that they previously had drawn and made all these images of both of them doing these great things, making these deals, like
and they traveled afar too. Like
right.
they went abroad into the uncultivated lands where nobody had gone or whatever.
Right. But the point that I'm getting to here is, imagine okay, so if you go to Washington D.C., we have all these statues and images of all these various people. Now imagine if like way in the future, somebody came and was looking at the remnants of these statues, and they found that like half of them, for whatever reason, had been all defaced and thrown in pits, right?
Yeah.
So first you have the impetus to carve all these images, right? But then later somebody comes along and tries to erase just part of them, not the whole image, but specifically focuses on specific figures in the images, but doesn't destroy. They don't come in and destroy the friezes, the carvings. Yeah. They don't shatter them, right? And that may be because it's impossible to shatter a giant basalt head. I don't know. The basalt heads were not well, some of them were. You could see huge pockmarks on some of them. Some of them have the noses broken off, right? But in general, the bas reliefs or the high relief carvings and stuff like that, there's just, and this is reflected in Egypt too, where specific people have been etched out.
Yep.
Right, so first you have the impetus to carve all this very specific stuff, and then later on somebody comes in, doesn't destroy the thing, but just defaces one of the images or one of the people in the images or parts of their faces, or you know what I'm saying? Like there's something happening there that matches with that story, that this was a chosen thing. That there was this choice, like they're going to. In other words, it wasn't that you don't see images of those people slowly getting wilted and like eventually becoming not important. No, they were suddenly erased out of the picture.
Yeah. Yep.
So like that really just blew my mind. That like maybe there's this connection, and like I don't know of anybody that's made that connection to the Epic of Gilgamesh, to these. People have been looking at these images and wondering, who are these people? Yeah. But your retelling of that story, and then specifically focusing us on it as this is a story of civilizations, made me see that in a whole new light. And I'm like, holy shit, this is them.
Yeah, that's cool. So we're finding this recording of this tale in the East.
Right.
And Gilgamesh goes to the east in the end of the tale. I was looking at my notes, but I didn't actually write it down. But I'm pretty sure the path through the mountain, that was this whole astronomical, 12 leagues and and it was the path of the sun. It was to the east. Okay, I'm pretty sure. I'll have to look back at that. But so his trip where he brought the tale of the time before the flood, was in the eastern lands. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's like somehow I'm trying to make that connection. Like if they were over here in the quote unquote West,
Right, and then he goes east.
after that whole decline of the Enkidu civilization.
Yeah. What I'm thinking is that Utnapishtim may have been here in the Americas. What about that?
Yeah.
What do you think about that idea? Because he has to go across an ocean.
Yeah, exactly. But if the two civilizations were here,
Oh, okay.
and the Gilgamesh civilization went to the east after the Enkidu civilization failed.
I got you. They were here, and then like they left and went there. Okay, I got you. So he went to the east, but didn't he come back at the
Yeah.
end of the story?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
He comes back, and then he starts telling that he narrates the story, and
Yeah.
then basically that last bit is when just kind of telling. Eventually, he dies.
Right. Yeah.
But the end of the epic really is when he returns.
Right.
I mean, there is the sort of like the epilogue or whatever you call it, where
Yeah.
it's just saying he engraved it all in a stone, and eventually he died, and
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I don't know what to say about because it's obvious that to me that the Sumerians are carrying on a legacy
exactly,
that they're telling this story that's much more ancient than they themselves are,
right.
and they imply that this is a very old,
But
very very
remember
old story.
that Gilgamesh goes. Okay, it could be that he went to the west or whatever. I'm not sure, but I thought that path passed through the mountain and then across the sea.
Yeah.
That he was
going east?
That he was going to the east, right?
Okay.
The eastern, the far away.
Right.
And he crosses the ocean with Urshanabi and all this stuff. And every civilization that he came upon, the winemaking lady, the ferryman,
Yeah.
Urshanabi, and then eventually to Utnapishtim, he tells his story. Like, he gives them a synopsis. Like, this is what happened to me. This is why I look this way.
Yeah.
My friend died and everything, and I'm seeking this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too. Like, should we look at every character
That's what I was.
as a civilization?
Yes, that's what I.
So what was Humbaba?
That's what I don't know. I was thinking
said
about
that he was constructed.
Right, the things that they fought
Are not
were-
civilizations maybe forces
to me,
of nature?
that's what I thought. They were conquering these forces of nature, or something like that. Right?
Okay.
They were getting power. And then, of course, there's the gods, Enlil and Enki and Inanna and whatever. And I'm not sure. I wasn't thinking about them because they're so deeply embedded in the
Yes.
Sumerian mythology.
Right.
But
They
this
may have
tale-
been taking place of what the original ones were.
Right. This tale was of something else. And then, now again, looking at mythology in general as a technology for passing knowledge down. Right.
Yeah.
You put it into this tale. You make characters out of everything. You have them do these certain things, and everything is symbolic.
Yeah.
It's telling the truth. So it's like,
Stand down or die.
who knows if it was like these civilizations that he's coming to, or city states or whatever that he's passing as he's going to the east.
Yeah.
He's telling his tale. In other words, that civilization is bringing their knowledge and history
I cannot do
to
Yeah.
these civilizations, and that's where it was recorded. It was recorded in stone here when he came back.
Yeah.
But we were totally freaking wiped out.
Right.
But over there they have these records of the information that was brought to them.
Yeah.
And then of course when you go to their other aspects of their mythology, like the Enuma Elish, they have these stories of these people, the Anunnaki or whatever, coming from somewhere else.
400,000 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and giving them knowledge and all that, so I don't know how it all ties together, but that's really cool. We'll have to look at that.
Yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to point out about the whole, because I was looking into this Anunnaki deal, and again at the king list, right? If you look at the king list, the antediluvial times that are given for the reigns of these various kings, they're all
Yeah.
multiples of 3,600.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got 64,000. You got whatever 12,000. All these numbers I can't name them off because I don't know, but they're multiples of this.
Yeah, 72.
Yeah, but 3,600 like specifically is a base number. Like you can divide 3,600 into every one of them and
Right.
get a whole number, and they're usually small, like 8. If you take this one and divide 3,600 into it, you get 15. If you divide 3,600 into this other timeline, you get 4. Right? It works. every time. So what I was thinking about was the whole idea of kingship was brought down to Eridu, and so reigned, and they reigned for 60 whatever 1,000 years, right? And then the next king in Eridu reigned for so many thousand years. 2 kings, they reigned for a total of 100 and something thousand years, and all those are divisions of 3,600. So I'm listening to this guy. I was listening to this guy who is like he was a follower of Sitchin. He was Sitchin's webmaster before he died. He worked with him for 15 years, something like that, and he's kind of carrying on his work. He's gotten angry at all these people attacking Sitchin now that he's dead. Yeah. People who like totally didn't say anything while he was alive because they would have gotten their asses handed to them are now saying all this stuff. And so he's basically stood up and been like, hey, F you, STFU, here's all his evidence and you guys are still wrong, right?
Yeah.
He points out that the orbital period that Sitchin determined based on everything he was looking at with the Sumerian writings of Nibiru was 3,600 years, give or take. Obviously, a planet that goes that far out and has that erratic, that eccentric of an orbit is going to vary as many as 100 years or more each orbit, because you can't tell. Like, it depends on the very specific arrangement of planets as coming in and going out. It's going to wobble. So I'm thinking about the kingship. What if, because we know, like, your idea of like we're in some kind of overlapping time cave hole on Earth, right? Right. So these people on this planet out here, their year is 3,600 years long, right? So they go out and they come back, and that's 1 year to them. To us, it's 3,600 years ago was when they were here before. So whether they are just extremely long-lived, or because of the orbit of their planet, or because there's some kind of overlapping time cave hole here, this guy is actually based on Nibiru, and he rules for 8 years. And he's the king name, but he's there. The kingship is some device that is in the temple that the priests interact with. You see what I'm saying? Because we know that they established this priesthood that was supposed to be like the go-between the Anunnaki god king guy. And, so like you have the
But again, if it was the overlapping time cave hole thing, the thing that goes out, if you're on that planet, you're
it would take
there
them a long
for
time to
millions,
reply.
billions of years or whatever.
Well, no, yeah, I'm reversing it. Like that
It goes out and gets close to something that.
No, what I'm suggesting, yeah, you're right. So if it's an overlapping time cave hole problem, then that wouldn't work. But if they just live a long time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so like they live a long time, and he's basically king of Earth on Nibiru for 8 years.
Yeah.
Okay, he's not king of Nibiru. He's basically the ruler of Earth, but he's based there.
Right.
And he interacts with us through this device that's in the temple. That's the kingship.
Yeah. For so many revolutions of their
planet, right?
Year.
The priests on Earth in the temple do most of the administrative work, and they bring like serious decisions to the kingship, which conveys it to the guy who's the king of Earth from afar, the sky god. He's the bearded guy in the sky. Okay, that was my idea. Basically, I was like, here's what maybe this describes the strange wording that kingship was brought down, and it resided here. It wasn't a person. The kingship was brought down, and it was in Eridu. This thing was in Eridu, and then after a while, Eridu fell out of favor. Maybe the priests started to suck. They moved it over to Uruk, and it sat there for a while, and then they put it to Shurapak, and then they moved it over to and then they brought it back to Eridu for a while. You see what I'm saying? This device, and the extremely long reign times are because these long-lived sky beings are on this other planet, and they're administrating Earth from their position on that other planet.
Yep. That makes sense.
And that's why every reign time pre-flood is a multiple of 3,600 years, which is 1 year of Nibiru.
Right.
Bam!
That's cool.
Mystery solved.
And with that, we have to take another break.
That's right. Snake facts. I don't even want to interrupt this music. With half our pyramids tied behind our backs just to make it square, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming back for the second half of the show, right?
Yep.
I got this totally wrong last time, so I want to make sure this is the second half of the show. Yeah. So I want to encourage you guys to check out the works of Dr. Manly P. Hall. He has, if you're interested, like, this is what I would do. Just look him up on YouTube. Manly, Manly P. Hall. Look him up on YouTube. There's tons of his recorded lectures, and you can go through them. One of the most fantastic ones is his lecture on Atlantis. But basically, what I want to start the second half of the show with is a soundbite that I pulled from one of his lectures. I've been listening to them recently because I wanted to. This guy wrote a book called The Secret Teachings of the Ages, and it is an enormous tome, packed with esoteric information that he spent his entire life digging through. He basically was, as a young man, he was given a dispensation, like he was like old school patronage, right? This wealthy woman basically said, "You have unlimited funds to travel the world and dig out all this esoteric information, and then tell me about it," right? and he just did that, and like he gave lectures on all this information that he had found, and it is, I mean, he's a snake bro, basically. So I want you guys to listen to this. We'll start out with this soundbite. It's about 6 or 7 minutes long, and it just encompasses like every awesomeness that we talk about here on the show, and what is encapsulated in his thinking and teaching. And think about the fact that this guy was doing this in the 50s. Okay, so, but yeah, let's go ahead and listen to this clip.
Prepare for a flawless and seamless splicing of this sound.
Our Hermetic problem, then, seems to deal with the breakthrough in North Africa of certain secret instructions. We know that the priests of Amun-Ra, those who wrote the rituals of the dead, those who gave the ancient Egyptian Amunism, and later the Osirian religious cult, those who swung their censers before the altars of the great old gods, these priests, with their chants, their rituals, their rites, and their ceremonies, were not the builders of the pyramid. The builders of the pyramid were mathematicians, masters of geometry, deeply versed in astronomy, possessors of exact sciences. These exact sciences, therefore, moved behind the surface of Egyptian religion. And Dr. Preston pointed out that he told me one day that he was convinced that the Egyptian hieroglyphics have at least 2 different methods of being read. One being a sacerdotal language, a language of priestly process, and the other in some way related to the mystery systems. Dr. Preston was convinced that behind the surface of Egyptian religion was this great wisdom cult, the cult that produced Imhotep, the father of medicine, the cult which made possible the building of these great monuments, and also the gradual regulation of the laws of Egypt, until Egypt became probably one of the most magnificently integrated cultures in the history of antiquity. These things were practical achievements, achievements that could only have arisen from adequate knowledge. The people did not possess that knowledge. The Egyptian lived and died without it. The rulers of Egypt, although initiated into the priesthood, did not always possess it. Actually, it was held by a group, an organization, a secret body of persons. And this secret body perpetuated itself by rites and ceremonies, as described by Plutarch in his Mysteries of Isis and Osiris. This breaking through in Egypt seems to have given us the basic principles of Hermetic philosophy. because these principles deal with certain things, the true nature of deity. The true nature of deity, here interpreted as the eternal mind, which brings all things into existence by the power of thought. Thus, Thoth, thought, Hermes, Mercury, gives us the concept of a world that exists in the divine mind, a projection and manifestation of the eternal thinker. And he tells us that the world is the non-eternal thought of that eternal thinker, that all things are supported on the warp and woof of thought, Thoth, for our word thought comes from his name. This being, therefore, which is the creating power, creates by will, creates by the exercise of secret attributes. This deity is not a highly glorified Louis XVI. This deity is not the Zeus of ancient Greece, nor the Jupiter of the Latins. This is a mystery god, a god without form, of which all things are the form.
Cannot do that.
A God without dimensions or proportions, but containing all dimensions and proportions within its own nature. A God of 7 powers, which are 7 arts and sciences. And a God ruling by the inevitable motion of its own being, and this motion absolute law. When we begin to see this, we begin to see that we are escaping from most of the type of thinking that wrecked antiquity. We are moving forward into something, and we do not know how it was concealed as long as it was, but that it appeared spontaneously in many areas, and that it is intimated by men like Pythagoras and Plato, who were initiates, to have existed, intimated by Apuleius and Plutarch, to have existed, referred to arcanely by Cicero and Seneca, known to the Emperor Julian as the result of his own initiation at Ephesus, and appearing again in the apocalyptical writings of the New Testament. These factors breaking through seem to tell us beyond any reasonable doubt that this structure of the Corpus Hermeticum was the beginning of, or one of the beginnings, of the effort to build a complete scientific philosophical foundation under the collapsing religions of antiquity. That this information had been previously perfected, and that the outstanding examples of this perfection would be found in the great architectural and legal documents of antiquity, such as the Code of Hammurabi, probably the earliest and one of the most enlightened of all legal codes. That it is to be found concealed in various ways in the proportions and dimensions of ancient buildings. That it roots in mathematics. That it roots in subjects so ancient that we cannot even trace their beginnings. That there was also a consistent, integrated concept of the solar system, of the universe, of space, of time, of energy, and all of these things, which certainly form no part of the decadent ceremonials of the old, later Roman priesthood, whose principal concerns were to be sure that they had the right cap on and that they were wearing the red slippers, without which they could not perform their sacred duties.
So he goes through a whole bunch of stuff there, but I just wanted to point out that he is talking about quant stuff at the very end, right? That all this stuff is encoded in these ancient religions that carries up into the religions of Rome, but the priests there were so quant stuff that all they were concerned with was did they have on the right hat and were they wearing their red slippers? Because if they weren't, they couldn't do their ceremony. Yes. But he has a whole bunch, so that's
I love the part about Thoth.
Yeah.
Being the word thought. That's where we got it. That's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
Yep. But yeah, I love this guy. Like, so he goes through a whole bunch of stuff there that we have talked about on this show about how there seems to be this underlying impetus, this hidden knowledge that's somehow injected into these ancient religions, right? Or these ancient cultures that then results in these quant sub-religions much later on.
Yeah.
Right? So you have these injections at the very beginnings of these civilizations. So Egypt, like, you know, the dynastic Egypt period just suddenly appears fully formed with all of this incredibly detailed stuff, like including the hieroglyphs, all of these myths. They have no progenitors, seemingly. They just come out of nowhere, fully formed, and you know, with all these astronomical and scientific ideas, and then there's a slow degradation from then on for thousands of thousands, and yet it was so powerful that it lasted 4,000 years before it completely fell apart.
Yeah.
Right? And it carries on into Greece and everything, and it's still encoded in in things we can see throughout our society today, like Thoth and thought. Like these ideas are still floating in the zeitgeist, I guess you would say, of human thought, of like the existence, at least of the Western mind.
Yeah.
And there's probably similar injections that happened in the East, in China, and so on and so forth, and that's why they have pyramids everywhere over there, right?
Yeah.
You've got the same. So this is why Manly P. Hall is awesome. Okay, like sometimes when you're listening to him, he has an antiquated way of talking sometimes, and you're just you know. But when he really gets going, it's basically just. You know, that's how I feel when I'm listening to him sometimes. But
that's really cool. That lines up with what we were talking about in terms of, you know, the Akashic records being all of this stuff that's built all over the place, and
Right.
all of the religions and all of the mythological texts and everything.
Yeah.
It's all encoded.
Yes.
All the science and knowledge is encoded in there.
Yeah.
And that I guess the progenitor of all of that is Thoth. Like,
yes, yeah, he's saying that Thoth or Thoth is the dynastic Egyptian projection of this deeper mystery concept.
yeah.
Okay, which is why he was given the ibis head. Like he's not given a. He's basically a god of the mysteries of the universe, right?
Yeah.
And so he's the god of wisdom. And so he talks about this. You have these. So you and I were discussing this after the show last week or maybe the week before about how sometimes it looks like that. Okay, so the idea that you had of the Akashic records and how there's this sort of impetus given. This is why people mummify themselves and why they bury things with themselves, and they're encoding all this stuff, and they're trying to. There's this preservation instinct or impetus built into.
It's almost it's a custom,
right. And so what I'm suggesting, and what it sounds like he's suggesting too, is that part of this is because this is being injected into the customs on purpose. This idea of recording things, right? Like, you know, and some people will say, well, to have large administrative states, you've got to record things. People have to, you know, this is why the Sumerians have like millions of tablets of taxes and selling goats and stuff like that. But the whole, like, if you look at the pyramid texts, okay, the beneath that pyramid, there's just all the walls are covered in what the scribes were describing. The scribes who cut it into the walls were saying, we have all of these documents that are falling apart. They're so incredibly ancient.
Yeah.
And we don't even know really what they're saying because most of these symbols we don't understand anymore because they're so old. But we're going to record what we can into the stone of these walls to save it.
Yeah.
The same thing is present in the Edfu building text. The Edfu building texts are the same thing. The scribes at Edfu were the keepers of a library. And the library was so old, or the documents that it contained were so ancient, that they were beginning to fall apart. And so they started, the scribes, in a desperate attempt to save what they considered to be the most important parts of these documents that they didn't really understand anymore, were just copying them directly onto the walls of the actual library.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the library becomes later stables, and then it becomes like, hovels for people who are in poverty, and it's like filled up with dung and trash and everything like that. And eventually, archaeologists go in there and dig all this stuff out, and they're like, "Oh my God!" And there's all this ancient, completely, almost totally can't understand it. We can't understand it because the people who were writing it onto the walls didn't understand it.
Yeah.
But the information that it contains is like just the bits that they can translate is fantastic. Now, if you caught at the beginning of that, or somewhere right after the beginning, he says that this renowned Egyptologist, this guy who was basically a hieroglyphic translator, told him that he was convinced that there were 2 ways to translate hieroglyphs. Did you catch that? He said there's the one way that we know that's part of the Rosetta Stone translation, right? So you have the Rosetta Stone that had the hieroglyphs and the Latin and the right, and that's one we use. But he says that there's another entire hidden way to translate them that was built into the system.
Built into the
system of hieroglyphs, yeah. So you can write normal things or whatever, but you can, because they had a hieratic script, which was an alphabetic type.
Yeah.
So you could write normal things alphabetically, but when they're using all those flowery images, the actual hieroglyphs, there's 2 ways to translate it. And it's sort of like the exo and exoteric way of translating it, that it says 2 things at once, that it says, here's a story of this guy and his wife, who was also his sister, and they were the gods in the sky, and blah, 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 blah. But underneath that is all this math and all this technical information.
Yeah. Yes.
I also love the way he talks.
Yeah, me too.
He's got this cadence, you know. It's like one of my favorite things he talked about when he's talking about Plato or whatever. And he's like, you know, Plato. he says in his Timaeus and Critias dialogues, Plato recorded the information transferred to him from his many times distant ancestor, Solon, who, upon angering the authorities in his own country, went to Egypt, to the land of the pharaohs, that's how he says it. And there he met the priests of a mystery cult who took him down beneath the plateau of Giza, beneath the pyramids, whereupon he saw a subterranean lake in which was an island, upon which stood the pillars of Enoch. And I'm just like, oh my God, it's just, God, tell me more. It's freaking awesome.
Man.
So yeah, check him out if you can find a copy. I mean, you can get the Secret Teachings of the Ages. As far as I know, there's a PDF. You can get it for free and read it. It has all these images in it. Like he puts in, you know, and he'll just discuss like in minute detail the very complex symbolism in these ancient images, and just puts it all together. It is fantastic. But he has many lectures that you can just get on YouTube and listen to. Each one an hour and a half, 2 hours long. And they're just full. And sometimes he kind of goes off on preaching about social issues, and he's like, "So we should not be doing this," and blah blah blah. And this is why our society is messed up. But when he goes back to the ancient stuff and the secret teachings, it's just fantastic. I mean, I agree with most of his social things. That he's talking about how, I mean, he talks about, even in this one lecture where I got that soundbite from, he talks about how the issues of commerce are not a problem, but the problem is once you become purely materialist, you become your own gods, right? That men they get caught up in their, like this is what he was saying, that this ancient mystery cult, which in this particular talk, he's talking about the Hermetic mystery, okay? And he's saying like, who is Hermes Trismegistus? Where did this come from? And he shows you how like that idea itself can't have been older than this particular period, but it carries within it ideas that are far more ancient and that actually go back before anything we can figure out, like before the dawn of time, of written history. But he basically says that the problem is once you have the human search for knowledge that lacks any kind of consideration of an afterlife or a divinity of any kind, that thinks that it itself is the largest thing in the universe.
Yeah.
That's when you have the problems. And I kind of agree with that materialism is a destructive thing, in a sense, right? In some ways it's very powerful, like get rid of all of this quant stuff bullshit and just focus on the science, right? But in other ways, if you're not able to step back and say that like what I'm looking at here is a giant puzzle, you know, that I am a consciousness interacting with something that is enormous, that is the product itself of some other consciousness, that I need. That if you don't do that, then if you just think that you're the only side of the equation and that you're dealing with a purely mechanical material world, then you have all these problems.
Yeah, something. One part of it in the beginning of it really reminded me of the thing you always say, like when we start talking about quantum physics and everything, and that consciousness is fundamental. You know, that it is the sort of the creative force that causes all of this physical stuff to happen.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of what he was saying there.
Exactly,
Yeah. It all begins with thought. It's the
Right.
thought that actually brought about all of the dimensions and everything.
Yeah, I love the way he said it, that it's an eternal mind, right? An eternal thinker that is having a non-eternal thought of the universe. That was very interesting to me. That the universe is created through the thought of this eternal thinking consciousness, right? That it is having a thought of this universe that is not eternal in scope, even though it itself is.
Yeah, that's freaking awesome.
So there's a lot of things encapsulated in that, but I love the fact that he gets into the quant stuff at the end there too. You know, that he points out that these things, that all these things resulted in the rituals of the Roman priests, but they were just doing rituals. They had completely they had quant stuffed it to the point to where what they were concerned with was where they were in the right hat and did they have the red slippers on, because that's what they have to do this particular ceremony.
That just made me think too about like this eternal consciousness that's having a thought. So the random number generators becoming less random when, you know,
Lots of
large,
people. Yeah.
vast amounts of people are thinking about the same thing.
Yeah.
It's like all of those individual thoughts of those people
Yeah.
Not do that.
say they are, you know, tiny aspects of the mind of
Stand
this.
down. or
They're
die.
Osiris slivers.
The Osiris slivers of this vast, you know, thinking entity. And so when we all start thinking of the same thing, it sort of like catches its attention,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because there's all this other stuff going on in the universe that is of this one thought,
Right.
right? Yeah. And then suddenly, like all these little consciousnesses
Start focusing on the
on
same
one thing,
and
and it's just like this. Oh, you know, it kind of just focuses the thinker,
on that
capital
specific-
capital T thinker,
Yeah.
on this one little aspect of our universe, and so everything becomes a little bit less random.
Right, because it's focused on it. Yeah.
That's cool.
That is cool. Wow.
Those are just really cool shit to think about, man.
So, again, the whole idea of this injected information, right? This is the going back to the Brotherhood of the Serpent, what our podcast is named after. Okay, the Brotherhood of the Serpent, the Saruman Brotherhood, is supposedly the like the idea of that is that it is the mystery cult, not cult, the mystery school, or I don't know what you would call it. It's a repository of knowledge that must last through the ages.
Yeah.
And it every once in a while it emerges and injects information into a culture that results in this massive civilization that builds giant triangles, right?
Yeah.
So
Occasionally, a couple of snakes show up and they say something like "scriptards," and eventually that spreads throughout the vernacular.
that's right.
It becomes part of the vernacular, and then the world has changed forever.
Right. So the Brothers of the Serpent is named after this brotherhood. So the idea of our podcast is to explore the mysteries that this brotherhood has been injecting into the human race for who knows how many years. That maybe, you know, like he says that about Solon and the pillars, seeing the pillars of Enoch, that those pillars contained encoded information from a lost civilization that we now call Atlantis. That's what he says.
Yeah.
Okay. And that this information is contained in them because there is something that continues through the catastrophes, that lasts through the up and down cycles of human civilization and natural disasters, right? So something has understood that we need to have this continuous root system, right? Like think of I was thinking about this today, like the whole idea with bamboo. Like you come on and you can like completely just chop down all the bamboo. It's a single plant.
Yeah.
Right? And it will come right back because its roots are all connected for acres and acres. And you can cut it all, you can set it all on fire. And then like a couple of days later, it's like bamboo is sticking up everywhere. And it's like you can't kill it. That's the idea of this Brotherhood of the Serpent. That it stays hidden So below ground, in a like quotations, like air quote sense, it's beneath the surface so that it can't be destroyed.
Yeah.
So that it can continuously re-inject this information. And somebody started this at some point because of these cycles of catastrophe.
Yeah.
And so Randall Carlson talks about this, right? That because there are these cosmic cycles that these ancients had recognized. Okay, so this gets to another topic I wanted to discuss. The whole as above, so below thing. I've been thinking about this for the past week after the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I'm like thinking about these are two civilizations, and this story is concerned with these two civilizations and how they just they come together and they start kicking ass, right? But there's this as above, so below thing that it can be taken two ways. Probably more than that, but two basic ways. It's a piece of advice or a command, maybe, and the other way is like basically one way.
It's a rule.
Yeah, one way is that this is a rule or something to follow, and the other way is this is something to look at.
Yeah.
Right. It's a key to unlock things, but it's also a key to making things.
Yes.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It probably is both. Like, we look at as above, so below, and that's a key to unlock why these certain structures look this way.
But it's also a way.
But it's also an instruction for people who are going to build something. Right. Do it as above, so below. So why is that? So let's look at it in terms of the instruction part. That this is a directive. What is that? Like, let's say that you're the Brotherhood of the Serpent, and all you do is go up to this civilization. They're making potsherds, right? They're getting to the point where they're ready to start building stuff, and you go and say, they've already made thousands of potsherds.
And, they've broken so many pots that they're ready to build a pyramid.
That's right. So as one of the Brothers of the Serpent, you go up to them and say, and tell their builders, as above, so below.
Yeah.
And then you walk off, and knowing that they're going to follow your directive because you're this tall, weird, bearded guy with a rope, right? You're the Viracocha. They start doing this. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to make their buildings match the sky. What happens when you do that? You can't not see the cycles. Right? Because you must study above to get the below right. You start to see, like, wait.
It's changing.
Things are changing very slowly.
Yeah.
And then you begin to see these enormous wheels in the universe.
Wheels, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also there's another reason to do it. To like not just for the civilization that's doing it, but for future civilizations. When they begin to uncover things, when they're still not knowing the cycles, they will find the cycles written down on the earth.
Yes. That's when it's a clue as opposed to a directive.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
Like, the directive handles both. It teaches, and it also reteaches after a cataclysm.
Right. So when you look at it with the understanding that, so all that's remained from this ancient civilization is as above, so below, then you can decode everything they did, and then you begin to see the wheels in the wheels.
This is why I was, like, a while back, I was talking about how it would be great if we could overlay the star map on the planet in reverse time, like in Stellarium or whatever, look at the positions and go find places where we haven't looked, that would correlate to certain, to astronomical features in the sky.
Yeah, and the Orion correlation actually did that in Egypt, which is really cool.
Yeah.
When he made that correlation, there were certain stars of Orion that didn't have any known structures that were then found.
Yep. Exactly.
So yeah, I love the idea of this. One of the things that has always fascinated me and many other people who, and I know you also, everyone who looks at this ancient stuff, is how cleverly they sort of made things merge together.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you look at their calendrical science, and you're like, how did they, who came up with this way of merging the cycles of Venus into this non-real 360-year sacred calendar with the 365.2444 whatever real calendar, the solar side, and they merged all these things perfectly together, and then built little standing stone things and giant pyramids so that they could check stuff and make corrections, and just who thought of that? You know, and it's the same thing.
Thought of that.
Who thought of that?
Oh God, here come the Thoth police.
Good idea, Lord. Of course it's a good idea.
It just made me think of another correlation with the Gilgamesh story when you first were talking about that. Let me think. Had to do with the destruction of Enkidu. Golly.
Well, I know that like there are numbers throughout the Gilgamesh story that are basically giving you flags for procession, right? There's this.
Oh, I remember what it was.
Cool.
I'm sorry.
I was just trying to fill time there.
Okay, who is it that gets mad? Like in this story, Enlil is the one
Yeah.
that's getting mad. That just, ultimately they decide that one of them has to die.
Yeah.
It's the Babel story,
Right.
Within the Babel story. See the
I see. Yeah, yeah.
Like in other words,
They're speaking the same language.
There's the part in Utnapishtim's tale of the flood where Enlil's like, "Oh, their Babel is blah blah blah." That's
Yeah.
giving you a clue that what happens with Enkidu and Gilgamesh
Is the similar thing.
the same thing. They were together. They were speaking the same language. They were too powerful, and he's just like, one of them has to die.
Right. Yeah, and so again, going back to the connections with ancient Mexico, there's the Cholula pyramid. I think it's Cholula. The huge one that has the freaking cathedral on top of it.
Yeah.
That it was built over many centuries, and it's 4 gigantic levels, right? It is still to this day the most enormous thing ever made anywhere by anyone ever. It is the most large known building on the planet still.
Yeah. And in the tale, he's like, "Look at the Temple of Inanna. It is the biggest and greatest thing ever built, and that ever will be built."
Right, but associated with that thing is the story of Babel, that all these different men came together and were like, "Let us build this thing. Let us make a name for ourselves." Like what are Gilgamesh and Enki talking about the whole time?
Yeah.
Like we're gonna be heroes. Everyone's gonna know us. We're gonna be awesome, right?
That's right.
Let us make a name for ourselves. Let us build this tower that reaches the heavens, and then of course there's a whole thing that the one of the gods is like, look at what they're doing, like this is only the beginning. Like if we don't stop them, nothing could stop them. If we don't stop them now, then they will be able to do anything they want, and this is only the beginning of it. We must stop them, and so all the gods come down and scatter them.
Yeah. And that could just be a sort of a mythological way of saying that the gods that decide that we're too powerful are the cataclysms that come.
Right.
They just this is nature doing this.
Yeah, it could be. It's interesting that they give it
Agency.
an agency, yes, and that it's multiple.
Yeah.
Stand down or die.
And that there's always this one that gets mad, right?
I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying it could be.
No, yeah, I agree. What I think is that they gave the cataclysms agency for whatever reason. Now, I don't know if that's just a way to tell the story,
Yeah.
do that.
but the idea that so most of the time when you hear the stories told now, especially if you're going through if you're looking at it from the sort of Western or Christianized version, right? The cataclysm is because man has done something wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? And that God is justly destroying man. But if you look at these more ancient stories that are telling similar stories, it may not be the same event, because obviously multiple cataclysms have taken place. A lot of the older stories say that man was just doing something that the gods didn't like.
Right.
Not necessarily that it was wrong. You don't get any idea that what they were doing was terrible.
Right.
Right? So it's more in the newer versions where you see like man is doing something that's wrong.
Yeah.
And then the God says we have to stop this because it's wrong.
Right.
Okay. In the older stories, it's man is doing something that he would just normally do, like he's trying to be better,
Yeah.
and God is like no, or the gods. I shouldn't say God. These lowercase g gods, whatever, are like we can't let them be better.
Yeah.
Because they will be soon they will be like us, and then there will be no stopping them, right? So.
God says to unknown compatriots, "Look at what they're doing down there."
Hold up. Wait a minute. Something ain't right.
All right. We gotta take another break. wrapping up the fastest 2 hours in podcasting. Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Now you know. This was all a plan. Started 400,000 years ago by our early brothers to continue the custom of the land.
That's right.
Drink the wine and eat the bread of life.
So, I was thinking about the whole. So we've gone through some of this before, but like you have these cultures that have these what you could consider to be anachronistic features, right? Like they have like the Mayans had this incredibly advanced calendar science, but not necessarily. They weren't necessarily advanced in other ways, right? Their architecture was interesting, but it wasn't really super awesome, amazing, right?
Well, their stone architecture.
That's what I'm talking about.
What else did they build with?
Yeah.
That's gone.
Yeah. I mean, their stone architecture is fantastic, but it actually looks like they may have inherited some of those structures from what we call the Olmecs, right?
Yeah.
And the Olmecs are a conglomerate of a whole bunch of things that maybe not connected into a single culture. They're just they have the Toltecs and the Toltecs and the Olmecs or whatever. The Olmecs are supposedly older, and we know now that the Mayans inherited their calendar science from the Olmecs, because the Olmecs had the whole dot and bar numbering system that was used to do all the calculations.
Yeah.
That contained things like zero. Right. Well, the Mayans had zero. Like, they didn't need zero if you look at their stuff. They did calculations that concerned themselves with hundreds of millions of years.
Yeah.
Why? They had this incredibly advanced astronomical calendrical science that is only necessary if you're a globe navigating civilization.
Yep. I just think that they were inheritors, like the people that we call the Mayans. Inherited in the same way that the way we talk about the Egyptians.
Yeah.
They inherited their knowledge.
Yeah.
And they were carrying it on in a semi-quant-stuffed way that we do now.
Right. Like wearing the right slippers and putting on the correct hat to do this ceremony.
All the real knowledge was in all the copper temples that they built after mining all that stuff out of the copper mines. It's all gone.
The copper temples.
Fabulous copper architecture is now piles of green dust.
Yeah. Well, and then there's also places like Nan Made All. This is completely unexplained. It has no known connection, and there's nothing like it anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe parts of Gunung Padang looked like it maybe on a small scale at the very top, because they were using columnar basalt and doing this sort of Lincoln log construction with it.
Yeah.
But the scale at Nan Made All is just... I mean, go look at the pictures. Like, if you go to the encyclopedia, I've got a whole entry on Nan Made All, and it is just...
Yeah, it looks like the Giants were playing pickup sticks.
Right. And some of the basalt columns are enormous. Like, I've never seen, I've looked at pictures of these outcrops of this columnar basalt that they have all over the world, Norway and various places in Alaska and everything like that. And the columns are, like, they have them in Ireland, they call it the Giant's Causeway or whatever. Mm-hmm. And, they're big, but they're not that big. Like, no one even knows where they got that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's so much of it contained in the building that the reason why we don't know where they got it is because they completely dismantled the mountain that was making it. Like, that's basically what 500 million tons.
Yeah, or they could have been picking it up, 400 feet down at the edge of the ocean and bringing it up to the top of the mountain where it's now only just sticking out of the water.
Yes, that's true. That the quarry for it
from
is probably
500 miles away or wherever it was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I want to go back to this. I know I've talked about this before, but the bread and wine, it just made me think of in my intro. We talked about Babel, and I think I've talked about this before, but now in the context of this idea that you're talking about, this directive almost.
Yeah.
There's the Babel aspect, and then there's the communion aspect.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like juxtaposed or whatever. The Babel is the breaking of communion,
Okay, I got you.
like the separation.
Yeah.
And then there's
You mean the Babel story, not the Babel as in
The Babel story. I'm sorry, the Tower of Babel story
Yeah.
is the breaking of the communion.
Right.
The communion, just like in the Gilgamesh story, like when he finally is, deciding to come into the society, he goes to the sheepfolds and he eats the bread and he drinks the wine.
Yeah.
And the bread is the bread of life, and the wine is the custom of the people. And so it's the customs are the people's way of remembering.
Oh yes.
We do these things, and why do we do them? Because these people before us did them.
Right.
It's a way to live a memory.
Yeah. A
Right.
morphic resonant way.
Yeah. So it's basically saying this exact same thing that the Christian communion ceremony is all about.
Yeah.
Eat this bread. It's the bread of life. Like,
Right.
The custom now believes that you do this and you will have everlasting life, right?
Right.
But you also do this in remembrance
remembrance.
of me, right? In my path. Like
Right.
I'm teaching you to live the memory,
Right.
right? And
Yes.
carry on the tradition, which is the memory, which is the knowledge. It's all encoded here.
Yes.
So you have these two aspects. The communion is the coming together of the people, continuing the customs of each other and their
Yeah.
knowledge, carrying on their knowledge, and therefore they will have life.
Right.
In other words, their works, their knowledge will live on,
Right.
right? Everlasting, as long as these customs are continued. And the more we come together in that way, the more we end up like the people that were building the tower.
Yes.
Because we are all of one language,
Right. We're communing with each other.
and we're achieving great things because we're looking at the sky. We are remembering all of the past destructions. We know what to pay attention to. We know what's important.
Right.
And then we begin to build the tower, which is our
civilization.
the civilization reaching to the sky to hopefully eventually overcome
Yeah.
the Babel effect. But it happens again, and it rips apart the communion, and people are stranded on little islands in the flood or whatever, and they no longer have communion and they lose it.
Yeah.
And then slowly, as we once again start following the customs, we uncover ancient things and start using the word thoth and
Yeah.
slowly remembering these
Yeah,
things.
translate-
We're eating the bread and drinking the wine again.
Right.
You know.
Translate the Corpus Hermetica. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, and this begins the Renaissance.
Right.
Because all of a sudden we have connected to all these ancient
Right.
rituals and memories. Yeah.
Right. And now so we just told the story of Gilgamesh. Well, that was the custom of the people.
Yeah.
That is the wine
Oh, yeah.
from back then. They told that story.
Right.
And now we're telling it again.
Yeah. In a dude way.
Yeah. In dude language. We're all of one dude
So we are connecting this ancient story to the present by telling it in a dude language, so that dudes can understand it.
Right, but that is now once again, and I'm not just talking about this podcast, but the fact that we found these tablets and that they were ultimately translated and that story was spread out all across the world and everyone was telling it and now it's taught in schools.
Yeah.
That is the drinking of the wine.
Okay,
It is
yeah.
the custom of the people to tell the story, to pass on the knowledge, to continue. That is part of the communion. So I think that... Holy crap. I love that analogy of the communion idea and it's weird that in the Bible, this is one of the things I thought was so strange about the Bible, is that you, on the one hand, you have the God character of the Bible seeing that has come together,
Yeah.
right? There's this communion, and it's like, oh, we must destroy them because.
Yeah.
And then later, supposedly, the offspring of that God character that's supposed to come down and teach man something teaches them the opposite.
Right.
You need to come together and do this thing, and all
Right.
become of one
Yes.
language.
Yeah. It's very much the Old Testament God looks very different from the New Testament God that is spoken of.
That's right.
Like first of all, he doesn't interact directly like he did in the Old Testament. He's interacting in an indirect way through the Jesus person, through his, through Jesus basically is like, so that there's no God is not coming down to any altars and like commanding people to do things like he did in the Old Testament. But like all the things that Jesus says in the New Testament are much gentler and more like very like come together sort of deal. That's what I'm saying. It's like I've always wondered about that. Like, what are we dealing with here? Like, are these the same people even? You know, I don't know. Like, I don't want to.
But it's even, you know, the whole idea of the New Testament.
Right.
The New
It's
Testament
a new covenant.
is
New Testament.
the new plan. So it's like if you follow this, you have this rise of civilization and then their fall.
Yeah.
Multiple falls. You know, the cataclysm of the flood, the cataclysm of Babel, whatever it was. And then you have this period like the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
It's like the Yuga cycle once again. Like the coming out of the Dark Ages is the reconvening, the communion aspect. So it's the book is open.
Yeah.
You know.
The other way that Babel story connects with Gilgamesh is like in the story of Gilgamesh, obviously this is after the flood. He goes and meets Utnapishtim, who was Noah, basically, right? So you know that the whole issue that the gods have with Gilgamesh and Enkidu is after the flood, and like in the Bible, the Babel story happens 600 years
after the flood.
After the flood, yeah. So that actually may be a brief retelling of the Gilgamesh story, like real quickly. Like that's their version of what happened. It's like there were these people that came together and they were like, "Ha, we're awesome! Let's build this tower and let's make a name for ourselves." And then the gods were like, "No." Yeah, because they were kicking too much ass.
Right. That's what I'm saying. That story itself like contains all these like layer upon layer of these other myths. It's like you can sort of. It's even though it's telling you the flood story, it could also be part of the flood story itself, and or the Babel story.
The other thing that I wanted to point out about that was just so cool to me while we were doing that podcast, while you were telling the story, is that I was thinking about how many people have listened to this story and loved it. And like somebody's telling the story 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, like who knows, 10,000 years ago. They're telling this story, and people are sitting around and they're laughing at the part where they're like, "Oh, praise be to Ea," right? To the wrong guy, like that. The idea of communion that you're talking about is like while I'm enjoying the story, I'm thinking of like how many other people have done this. What I'm doing right now, I'm sitting here listening to this story and I'm like, yeah, and I'm rooting for this guy. And like, how many people have rooted for these people and then been like, no, why did that happen? And been like, haha, yes, I can't believe they said that. Like all those same reactions. That is the ritualistic communion across the ages.
Yeah.
Right? What I was doing while you were telling that story is what everyone who has listened to that story has ever done. Because it's like, you can't not do it. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah, but I thought it was pretty funny. Like afterwards, you came up to me and you're like, "Man, I laughed really hard about that part where he said praise be to Ea."
Yeah.
People are gonna be like, "Damn, he's a serious like Sumer nerd."
Yeah, Sumer nerd. Found the Sumer nerd. He laughed when they said that, and like, if you don't know Sumer and all the gods and everything, that's not funny. You're like, they're like, praise Ea, and I'm like, because I know that they're saying that in front of a guy that they probably shouldn't be saying that in front of. But that's what I'm saying. Like, because I know those characters, I felt a connection with the Sumerians, who probably also laughed their asses off at that part, because they're just like, I can't believe he said that in front of that guy.
Yeah.
You know, that's just like, that kind of connection is what ritual, in that sense, what custom and ritual is about. Doing these ceremonies, whether they're quantified or not, doesn't matter. The point is that when you do this that has been done by your fathers and their fathers and their fathers and so on all down the line, you are making a connection with them across this great span of time, right? And thus building the communion and like putting more bricks on the tower. Like,
Is it not burnt brick?
yeah,
Good.
and good. Look at those walls. Also, so going back to the Manly Key Hall soundbite, that he pointed out that that Thoth, the concept of Thoth encompasses these 7 sciences, 7 sages. It's the same deal here. Like the 7 sages represent the sciences of Tahoti or Thoth.
The 7 splendors of Humbaba.
Right.
Yeah. See, that's what I'm saying. Like, he had all these things that were then... See, I think also
there are clues in what the splinters were by what Enlil did with them afterwards.
Exactly. And he didn't. It's not actually 7 things that he gave him to. Either.
Right.
It's weird.
Yeah, gave him to 4 things or whatever.
Yeah.
Somebody got more splinters than somebody else.
But yeah, that's why I was thinking like Humbaba is this sort of this construct. He's not a life form really, but they conquer it, and he has these weapons, and it's like, you know, we have all these different sciences,
Yeah.
all these different branches of science or whatever.
Yeah. His main weapon, though, is the deadly blaze or whatever.
Right.
The eye,
Yeah.
right? That's the comet laser.
Yeah.
And then the splendors that he wasn't able to put on were all the probably that encompass all the, I don't know, I was just guessing that like you got this main thing that is this, because I'm thinking again cataclysmically, and he's forces of nature, that like the 7 sciences allow us to conquer the blaze.
Yeah.
Right? And we know that like if we don't allow him to take the upper hand with those
Right.
sciences before he can put on his splendors, right? Then we can get like, so this
Then they can go, like, once they kill him, they scatter and they can go capture each and every
right,
each
and it
one.
connects to the extended version of the Babel story where they find out that they can wound an angel.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, they're like, wait a minute, like that thing bled when we shot the spear at it or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. This is I'm wondering if this is a connected thing. Like they discover, like, oh, we can stop.
Yeah, one
this.
guy throws a spear at an angel, and it drops blood on the ground. And they're like, they can be killed.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so this is like the whole thing of like they're going to Humbaba. They're like, well,
And that's when they decide
we're totally
to
gonna die.
go.
No, man, we can do this. We can do this.
Yeah.
All right, we'll go do it. You know what? He's gonna kill us with that eye. No, man, we can do it. We can do it.
The other part of the story that I left out was right after they killed him, they went through the forest and they were...
You didn't leave that out. They were cutting all the trees down and they found the ancient structure.
No, they were carrying the sword of 8 talents.
Yeah, okay.
I talked to you about this afterwards. I was
Right.
like, oh man, I left out the sword of 8
talents.
talents. And it doesn't, you know, you might mistake that it was, or think that it was one of the weapons that was built for them, but it never mentions this
Right.
name of this sword until they kill Humbaba and they gather up all of his splendors or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like they took all the splendors and the deadly blaze, and then they went through the forest and they carried with them the sword of 8 talents.
Yeah.
So I don't know what that is, but it's like they, you know, after they conquered it, they had this new weapon.
Yeah. So I've been trying to do with the Book of Enoch what you did with the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I am going to like eventually retell the story part. A lot of it's not a story. A lot of it is very Revelation-esque, prophesying, and then just explaining that, like,
It's just the rantings of an old bigoted old shaman.
well, what was interesting to me about that, because I'm listening to the story, and I've basically been going through the beginning part, because the beginning part is where at least the story part that I know of is happening. After that, it's Enoch is trying to describe stuff that it seems like he doesn't understand. And he's giving you all these flowery words, and he's like, and then there was this, and there was that, and there was this thing, and I saw that thing, but it seems more like he's attempting to describe the universe in terms of God and what he sees as like the you know. And there's other parts where he's like, and there was this house in the sky that was made of flame, and its floor was made of flame, and its walls were made of flame, and its door was of open flame, and I went into it, and the ceiling was of flame, but up there was a throne of ice, and I'm just like, okay, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
But the beginning story actually starts out with it describes the Watchers, Shemzaza and Azazel and all these guys, and like it lists their names and all of them end with L. So there's something
Yeah.
of God. Every single one of them is something of God.
Yeah.
Right? Blessed of God, the light of God, the song of God, the music of God, the favorite of God, everything is L. Like they're all
Yeah.
God names. And it says that they come together and they're like, okay, we're going to do this thing. We're going to go down. We're going to take ourselves. And it says they took one wife each. So they weren't like polygamists, like we're raping every woman in sight thing. They took wives, one each, and with them begat sons, and they taught things, you know. And Azazel is the one that the other gods, the ones that didn't do this, hated the most because of the stuff he taught, making the swords and breastplates and metallurgy and okay. And they blame all following wars on Azazel, as though teaching you to make a sword is the reason why men go to war. Come on.
Yeah.
It's like, no.
Before that, it was clubs.
Right. The sword is not the reason they go to war. But it says that they begat giants and they were the Nephilim and so on and so forth. But what's interesting is that Enoch is not involved in this.
Yeah.
What happens first is the same deal. Some unnamed god, and it's not the top god because this one is like, look at what they're doing. And then it says that he goes to the Most High, the highest, and says, hey, they're down there having wives and they're making, and it's like he's whining to the guy or whatever, and so then it says that the council says, well, what are you going to do about this Most High guy? And the Most High guy's like, well, let's make sure that they can't come back into heaven, and then like he basically writes this missive that he commands Enoch to take to them, right? So Enoch is like, okay, so I'll take this thing and deliver it to them. And this is what this thing says to them. And Enoch tells you what this guy said. This guy said that you are supposed to be spiritual beings and you have defiled yourself and blah, 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 right? And because of this, all of these punishments, and you are going to be of the earth from now on, and from now on people will consider you to be spirits, and you will be called evil spirits, and you will be blah, 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 all this crap. That you're going to be basically all the problems that everybody's going to have on earth, and they're going to blame them on you. Okay? And then it says that Enoch is there after giving them this, and he's like, yeah, sorry about that, guys. Right? And these watchers, the fallen now, are lamenting. It says they're all sitting and they're lamenting this problem. They're like, what, you know, like it's weird. In the beginning, they're aware that what they're going to do is going to cause all these problems, or at least going to get the other gods mad at them or something like that. But it seems like their punishment is like really way more than they thought it was going to be or something, because that's how they act. And they're like, please, Enoch, take this to the Council of Gods and the Most High, you know, which is basically like a petition for
like not a plea deal.
Not forgiveness, but yeah, please, like, let us off the hook a little bit. Like, don't make it this bad. And Enoch is like, okay. And he agrees to this. It doesn't seem like he's really being bigoted here.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, like I think what Graham Hancock was doing was saying that, like, Enoch was making
it all up.
Yeah. So Enoch takes this like plea deal, like, or asking for some kind of clemency to the Most High, and the Most High's like, no. That's his response. Like, no, you're going to stay that way. And as a matter of fact, since you asked, I'm going to make it worse. And he, like, you know, and he talks about being locked into the stones of earth, that they will be in an arid land, and all that stuff that, like, makes me think about Antarctica again. That they were, okay, so Enoch describes the land of the Watchers. This is what really was interesting. When he's going to the land of the Watchers, he talks about there being 7 mountains, and there were 3 to the east, 3 to the south, or something like that, and then there was one in the middle of those 2 that sort of joined them together, and that there were valleys in between each one, and each valley was just absolutely gorgeous, okay, but totally separate from all the other valleys and hidden in between these, like, enormous mountains. And then there was this gigantic one that was sort of the corner of these 7 mountains, okay, and that on the top of that mountain was where it wasn't Hermon. It does say that the first place they stood was on Mount Hermon, and that's in the Middle East somewhere. Yeah. But that their land that they chose for themselves afterwards, after taking all the wives, okay, and then having these sons or whatever, was this other place. Now I'm thinking of this, I'm looking at this again in the terms that you were talking about, that, like, what we're talking about here is civilizations, that their sons who were the giants maybe have been civilizations. Yeah. Each one. Because if you see it, like, if each Watcher is injecting information into his progeny, which may be, like, in some esoteric way, he's, like, starting a civilization. Because if you look later in the biblical story of the Exodus, they come into the lands of Canaan, and there's all these civilizations made up of giants, and each one has to be is like, God commands the Israelites, like, wipe them out, man, woman, and child. Leave nothing, don't take any of their treasures, set everything on fire, throw it all into a pit and cover it over. Yeah. Salt the ground and leave, right? So I'm connecting all this stuff and thinking that the Nephilim, they may have been people of giant stature, but they were also not single beings, that they were civilizations being started, and this is what really pissed the gods off. Okay? Yeah. And it says that the land bellowed, and that the whole planet was loud with all of their noise, and they were doing all this stuff, and they were fighting. Some of them were fighting wars with each other, but in general, they stopped being like hunter-gatherer, quiet people in the woods kind of deal, and started being loud civilizations building giant towers into the sky and sending rockets into space, right? But going back to the Antarctica deal, There is a mountain range in Antarctica
Yeah.
that looks just like that.
That description of the land, like the two
Yeah.
land masses divided.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what's fascinating is he discusses this tree on the big mountain that's the sort of the connecting corner of the two mountain sets. That there's a tree atop it, and he spends all this time describing it, how it's unlike any other tree on the planet. And that it has this fruit that looks like the fruit of the date palm, but isn't. Now think
Is
about
that what the Sumerian gods are holding?
Think about how many depictions are called by archaeologists or anthropologists today. These depictions of the tree of life, they're saying this is a date palm, but it's
Yeah.
not quite. It's not exactly. It's something weird about it. Well, in the story of Enoch, he's like, there was this one tree, nothing like it anywhere else in the world, and it shone with a light, and that its fruit was like the fruit of a date palm, but more glorious. And he asked the watchers, what is this tree? I want to know about it. And they were like, why are you asking all these questions? He's like, well, I want to know everything about everything, but really I want to know about this tree right now. They're like, okay, well, that tree is the tree of life and blah, 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 blah. And they tell him the story about the tree of life. So if that was the tree of life, that's where it is. It's lost in Antarctica because like the whole thing after
Oh no, it's petrified. Dang it.
This is why there are bases next to the mountain tips that are sticking out. They're trying to dig down to find the tree of life.
Man, that's crazy, dude.
But yeah, I just was thinking about, like I don't know how this can really. Maybe this is a stretch to connect it with the Utnapishtim and giving him the whole idea of the plant underneath the water.
Yeah, that's what I was
This
thinking,
water
too.
is what? Is it the ice? Is Utnapishtim a representation of a civilization that saved? It's part of the Yima civilization, the Manu civilization, the Seven Sages guys who were forbidden afterwards from interacting with people for a while. If you look at the Manu story, the Seven Sages afterwards, they went out and they kind of did some things, and then the Apkallu, the Shimsu horde, the followers of the sons of Horus, they were forbidden after going out and sort of spreading their knowledge out and uncovering some certain things. They were forbidden from then on. The Apkallu were told to go back to where they came from and to not interact with the human race for a whole age.
Yeah.
Or for a long period. I don't know if it was an age. It may have been longer. But they were told to go back to where they... And it says that they went underground. The Apkallu went into hiding and went underground. So are the Apkallu, the Seven Sages, the Fallen, the Watchers, these fallen angels, whatever, are these the civilizations that may be part of what the breakaway civilization people were finding underneath the ice in Antarctica? Because that is the landmass that Enoch was describing. So what he was sent to look at...
The ant people of the Hopi ancestors.
There's the ant people of the Hopi and the snake people. They have two of them, and you can see that the ant people are shown, and then the snake people are like this figure this S-shaped person. There's the ant people and the snake people, these fourth and fifth parties, like what we were talking about in that episode. The third party is the breakaway civilization. The fourth party is the ant people, who are the longheads, and the snake people are the reptilians. Snakes. But yeah, so like there's all this. Is it the Apkallu that are doing the injections that are what would you call it? Sponsoring sponsoring the Brotherhood of the Serpent, carrying it on through the ages. Like think of these. In the Enoch story again, you really get the idea that the Watchers had no evil intentions. The ones that came down and took wives, they weren't. They weren't evil. Yeah. Nothing that they were doing was evil. They were like, let's come down and take a wife, one each. Okay, they're not raping everybody like the Greek gods did, where they were like, look at that shepherd, bam, 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 bam. You know, they just come down and rape people. Like, it's not like that. They came and took a wife, they had kids, and they taught people stuff. Yeah. Okay. And then and they knew that this was not going to be liked by other gods, but there was no... You don't get any idea that they're evil things, is what I'm saying. So these beings are in some way immortal or something. They can't die, and the Most High, whatever, these other gods, they can't kill them. They just say, well, you can't come back into space again. You can't be heavenly beings anymore. You're going to stay on Earth, and we're going to make sure that you have to stay hidden or that whatever. Yeah. But you get the idea that these beings will continue to try to help the human race because now they're stuck here with us.
Well, so one of the main interpretations of the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Am I making sense at all?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I'm following you. But one of the main interpretations of the Epic of Gilgamesh is about the whole pursuit of immortality,
Yeah.
right? And that he can't find it for himself, but that he basically becomes immortal by recording the tale. This is once again the sort of Akashic Records thing. Okay,
Yeah.
so the civilization that arose became immortal because because of what it built and what it left behind.
Yeah.
Because of the story, the customs, all of the
I
records
gotcha.
that it left
Yeah.
behind. So in the same way, you're talking about the Nephilim are building these cities, and it's like, well, we're going to end the civilization. The civilization will fall apart, but its record will be immortal.
Yeah.
Like, it will live on. It
Yeah.
can't, you know. So the people of the city or whatever will be wiped out. But if you're once again like reducing this character in, you know, or the civilization is reduced to a character.
Yeah.
The character dies, but what the character does in the tale
Is immortalized.
is immortalized. It is recorded in stone because that's what we're building with, and as above, so below.
Right.
Blah 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 blah.
I guess that's a good point. What I'm asking, I guess, and this is not a question that can be answered. It's rhetorical in a sense. Is like Manly P. Hall was talking about how there is these injections of information that began these giant triangle
Yeah.
building civilizations. Is the source these watchers still watching over the remnants, the far distant ancestors, or I'm sorry, far distant progeny of their families?
Yeah.
Basically, their sons of renown, right? And anytime somebody uncovers something, like not anytime, because there's obviously an opposing force to this, right? The whole idea, again, of the Brotherhood of the Serpent is that it's hidden because there's an opposing force.
Right.
Something the Enlil character does not want mankind to build towers.
Right. That's why the knowledge has to be hidden.
right. It has to be esotericized.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to hide this knowledge by building giant triangles.
Yeah. We're not hiding it from you. We're hiding it for you.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. All right. That's it for this week.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
We don't have time for that.
Good night, Adamu. Get back to work. Snakes.
Now you can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. And
Go to the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. We have the encyclopedia, the glossary, the About Us page, which has some great pictures of us in the Tangent Cube, and the Watcher in
you
space.
can donate to our pyramid scheme.
That's right. Donate to our pyramid scheme. The donate button right there on the website on the upper right. And you guys can comment on any of the episodes, and we will read the comments on the show. And we have really enjoyed the comments. You can go and give us awesome 5-star reviews anywhere you can give 5-star reviews. And so far, that is exactly what you guys have done, and you're awesome. Thank you very much. All right, this is for real. Good night, Adamu. Get back to work.